If you're curious to know what consequences King David suffered in his family because of his sins, this video is for you. Today we're going to delve into one of the most intense and moving stories in the Bible, the cruel fate of King David's sons. Tamar, Amnon, Absalom, and Adonijah were central figures in a series of events marked by tragedy, betrayal, and power struggles. This biblical narrative not only reveals the complexities of family relationships and the consequences of human sins and actions, but also offers profound life lessons that resonate to this day. Stay with me until the end of this moving video as we explore the ups and downs, the moments of pain, and the challenges faced by these historical characters. Let's discover together how their stories can teach us about justice, forgiveness, and the importance of the choices we make. Make sure you subscribe to this channel and don't forget to leave a like. That way, you'll be directly involved in the creation of more videos like this one. That said, let's get to today's stories. Tamar was King David's daughter and Absalom's sister, a young woman who shone as much for her beauty as her virtue. From an early age, she was known throughout the kingdom of Israel for her charming appearance and her gentle, fair personality. Tamar was not only beautiful, her grace and dignity made her stand out among many. She grew up in a royal environment, surrounded by the luxuries of the court, but she never lost the humility and kindness that characterized her. Tamar was a young woman full of life and dreams. She was deeply respected and admired by everyone around her. Her attitudes reflected her faith and impeccable character. With every step she took through the halls of the palace, her presence lit up the atmosphere, bringing a touch of hope and joy to all who met her. But as often happens in life, Tamar's fate was about to take a dark and unexpected turn. Tamar's life began to change when her half-brother Amnon, David's firstborn son, began to harbor an unhealthy obsession with her. Amnon was attracted not only by Tamar's beauty, but also by her purity and goodness. He allowed himself to be consumed by an overwhelming desire, which led him to plot a cruel and selfish plan. Pretending to be seriously ill, Amnon asked Tamar to come to his room to prepare a special meal for him, claiming that her presence would help him feel better. Innocent and unsuspecting of Amnon's dark intentions, Tamar complied with his request. She entered Amnon's room with the same kindness and dignity she always showed. However, as soon as she was alone with him, Amnon revealed his true intentions. Ignoring Tamar's desperate pleas, he raped her, destroying her innocence and leaving her in a state of deep despair. Tamar's dignity, which had always been her greatest treasure, was cruelly torn from her at that moment. Devastated and ashamed, Tamar tore her clothes and sprinkled ashes on her head, a sign of mourning and shame. She fled from Amnon's room, seeking refuge and consolation in her brother Absalom's house. On seeing the state Tamar was in, Absalom was deeply shaken and furious. He took her into his home and promised to do justice for her. The tragedy that befell Tamar marked the beginning of a series of events that would profoundly shake the house of David. The young woman, once a symbol of purity and virtue, now bore the pain and humiliation of a heinous crime. Tamar's beauty and virtue were never forgotten, but her life changed drastically due to the events that unfolded within her own family. The violence she suffered, and her brother Absalom's quest for justice, would trigger a sequence of tragic events that would plunge the kingdom of Israel into a period of conflict and pain. Meanwhile, Amnon tried to carry on with his life as if nothing had happened, but the violence he had committed would not be forgotten or forgiven. When David heard what had happened, he was deeply distressed and furious. But perhaps because of his love for his son, he didn't take immediate action. The lack of immediate punishment for Amnon caused Absalom to harbor a growing hatred, secretly plotting his revenge. The story of Tamar is a powerful reminder of the complexities and challenges of life, and of the dark forces that can emerge even in the midst of beauty and goodness. It is a narrative that makes us reflect on the importance of justice, dignity, and family love, and above all the fear of God, even in times of great adversity. And so Tamar's cruel fate intertwines with that of her brothers, Amnon, Absalom, and Adonijah, in a biblical saga that continues to resonate throughout the centuries. When Absalom learned what had happened to his sister Tamar, He was furious. Amnon's attack was not just a personal offense against Tamar, but an affront to the honor of the entire family. Absalom, known for his vigorous spirit and sense of justice, could not allow such a crime to go unpunished. However, he knew that immediate revenge would not be the best strategy. Absalom was a patient and calculating young man, so he decided to wait for the perfect moment to avenge his sister's honor. For 2 long years, Absalom harbored his hatred, disguising his true feelings and maintaining an appearance of normalcy. He behaved cordially with Amnon, hiding the contempt he felt. Meanwhile, he meticulously planned how and when he would execute justice. Absalom knew that revenge had to be precise and definitive, leaving no room for failure. The opportunity finally arose during the sheep shearing festival, a traditional celebration full of joy and festivities. Absalom organized a grand feast in his own field, inviting all the king's sons, including Amnon. He ensured that the party was a grand event, filled with music, dancing, and banquets. Absalom knew that the festive atmosphere would make Amnon lower his guard. David, initially reluctant, eventually allowed Amnon to go to the feast after being persuaded by Absalom, who argued that it would be a great opportunity for the family to gather and celebrate. With all the king's sons present, Absalom was ready to execute his plan. He instructed his loyal servants to wait for the right moment to strike. During the banquet, when Amnon was relaxed and drunk with wine, Absalom gave the order. His servants, who were prepared and waiting, quickly attacked Amnon, killing him with precision. The hall, previously full of laughter and joy, turned into a scene of panic and horror. Amnon's brothers fled in terror, fearing for their own lives. Amnon's death was a devastating shock to everyone. Absalom, aware of the repercussions of his act, wasted no time. He immediately fled to Geshur, the kingdom of his maternal grandfather. In Geshur, Absalom found a safe refuge, far from David's wrath and the immediate consequences of his revenge. David, upon receiving the news of Amnon's death and Absalom's flight, was deeply anguished and torn. The pain of Tamar's ordeal and the loss of Amnon mingled with the sadness over Absalom's escape. David loved his children, but he was caught between the duty to punish Amnon's murderer and his love for Absalom. The king found himself in an agonizing dilemma, unsure of how to reconcile justice with paternal love. For the next 3 years, Absalom remained in Geshur, while David, in Jerusalem, dealt with the pain and disorder that the tragedy had brought to his family. Absalom's revenge, though motivated by a desire for justice, resulted in a series of events that plunged David's house into even more chaos and suffering. The story of David's children continued to be a saga of love, hate, revenge, and forgiveness, reflecting the complexities of human nature and the consequences of impulsive actions. Absalom's flight and Amnon's death marked a turning point in the history of David's family. The ensuing pain and anguish left deep scars, not only on the royal family but throughout the kingdom of Israel. David, a powerful king and a loving father, faced one of the greatest challenges of his life, reconciling with his exiled son and restoring peace in his house. All of this happened to fulfill the sentence of God, passed through the prophet Nathan after David's sin with Bathsheba. Because of this sin of David, the sword would never depart from his house. 2 Samuel 12:10-11. For 3 years, Absalom lived in exile, far from the court of Jerusalem and the intrigues that now permeated the royal family. In Geshur, he found a safe refuge, but his mind and heart were constantly tormented by past events and the uncertainty of the future. During these years, Absalom not only isolated himself physically, but also emotionally distanced himself from his father, King David. David, in turn, was caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He deeply mourned the death of Amnon, his firstborn son, but also felt intense pain over the absence of Absalom, whom he loved despite everything. With each passing day, the longing for Absalom and the pain from the destruction of his family corroded David's heart. Despite his pain, David hesitated to bring Absalom back. He knew that Absalom's return could reopen old wounds and provoke new conflicts. Moreover, there was the issue of justice. How could he forgive a son who had committed murder? However, the love of a father finally spoke louder. and David began to consider the possibility of allowing Absalom to return to Jerusalem. Joab, the commander of David's army and a shrewd man, perceived the king's anguish and decided to intervene. Joab knew that reconciliation between David and Absalom was crucial for the peace and stability of the kingdom. He devised an ingenious plan to convince David to bring Absalom back. Joab sent a wise woman from Tekoa to tell David a fictitious story that mirrored Absalom's situation, highlighting the need for forgiveness and reconciliation. This story is found in chapter 14 of the second book of Samuel in your Bible. The woman's story touched David's heart. He recognized the wisdom in her words and finally decided to allow Absalom to return to Jerusalem. However, David imposed a condition. Absalom could return to the city, but he could not present himself before the king. For 2 years, Absalom lived in Jerusalem without access to his father. This situation only increased the tension and frustration of both. Feeling disrespected and marginalized, Absalom began to seek ways to draw David's attention. He knew he could not continue in this situation indefinitely. So, in an act of desperation, Absalom took a drastic measure. He ordered the burning of one of Joab's barley fields. Joab, furious with the destruction of his property, confronted Absalom, who explained his despair and demanded to be brought before the king. Joab, understanding the gravity of the situation and the need to resolve the conflict, arranged a meeting between David and Absalom. When they finally met, the reunion was tense and charged with emotions. David, with a heart divided between anger and love, looked at his exiled son. Absalom, for his part, tried to hide the anger and frustration he felt from the rejection and the long wait. Despite the tension, David finally forgave Absalom, allowing him to resume his position at court. However, the relationship between father and son was deeply wounded and full of distrust. The emotional scars that these years of separation and conflict left were deep. Absalom returned to public life, but resentment and ambition continued to grow in his heart. Absalom began to plan his ascension to power, determined to take David's throne. He started winning the people's support, promising them justice and attention to their complaints, something he claimed was lacking in David's reign. Over time, Absalom gathered a significant army and declared himself king in Hebron, forcing David to flee Jerusalem. The battle for the throne was about to begin, bringing new tragedies and challenges for David's house. And so Absalom's saga continued, marked by hatred, revenge, and ambition. The relationship between father and son, although partially restored, remained fragile and unstable, reflecting the complexities of human nature and the challenges of leadership and family. With Absalom's return to Jerusalem, the peace in David's house seemed superficial. Absalom was back at court, but resentment and ambition continued to boil in his heart. He was not satisfied with merely being present in the city. Absalom desired more. He wanted the throne of Israel for himself. Feeling that his father David no longer had the same strength and command over the kingdom, Absalom began to plan his rise to power. Absalom was a charismatic and persuasive man. He knew that to gain the necessary support to usurp the throne, he needed to win the people's hearts. So, he began strategically positioning himself at the city gates, where citizens came to resolve their disputes and seek justice. With a friendly and accessible approach, Absalom patiently listened to people's complaints, promising them justice and attention, something he insinuated was lacking in David's government. "Oh, if I were the judge of this land," Absalom would say to those who sought his help, "then everyone would receive justice, and no one would be neglected." His words and actions quickly won the people's sympathy. He embraced people, treated everyone with respect, and above all, made them feel heard and valued. Day by day, more and more people began to see Absalom as a just and compassionate leader, a true heir worthy of the throne. With popular support on the rise, Absalom knew it was time to take the next step in his ambitious plan. He asked David for permission to go to Hebron, claiming he needed to fulfill a vow made to the Lord. David, unsuspecting of Absalom's true intentions, granted him permission. Absalom left for Hebron, but not to fulfill a vow. There he declared himself king and began gathering a large army. The news of Absalom's self-proclamation spread quickly. Absalom sent messengers throughout Israel, announcing his claim to the throne and seeking support. Many joined him, attracted by the promise of a new reign of justice and prosperity. Absalom, now with a significant army, marched toward Jerusalem, determined to take his father's throne by force. David, upon hearing of Absalom's rebellion, was deeply shaken. He knew the situation was grave and that he could not confront Absalom directly in Jerusalem without causing a great bloodshed among his own people. With a heavy heart, David made the painful decision to flee the city to avoid a devastating battle. He left Jerusalem with his loyal followers, crossing the Kidron Valley and climbing the Mount of Olives, where he wept bitterly over what was happening. As David fled, Absalom entered Jerusalem triumphantly, taking control of the city. The capital was now in the hands of the young rebel, and the kingdom was divided. Absalom not only took his father's kingdom, but also took the women of his house in the same place where David had sinned with Bathsheba. However, David was not willing to give up without a fight. He began organizing his forces in exile, preparing for a crucial battle against his own son to retake control of the kingdom. David relied on the loyalty of his closest followers and the experience of his military commanders, such as Joab. He sent spies back to Jerusalem to monitor Absalom's movements and maintained communication with those who still remained loyal to him in the city. Meanwhile, Absalom consolidated his power, trying to ensure that his position on the throne was recognized throughout Israel. The tension between father and son grew, and the final confrontation seemed inevitable. The battle between David and Absalom would not be just a struggle for the throne, but also a conflict loaded with emotions, betrayals, and the fight for the very soul of Israel. The forces of David and Absalom would finally meet on the battlefield, and the fate of the kingdom would be decided. The final battle between David's and Absalom's followers took place in the dense and treacherous forest of Ephraim. This forest, with its tall trees and thick vegetation, would be the stage for an epic confrontation that would decide Israel's future. David, with his experience and strategy, had chosen this terrain carefully, knowing it could neutralize the numerical advantage of Absalom's army. Soldiers on both sides were tense and prepared for the fight. David, with his loyal warriors by his side, organized his forces with precision. He knew the battle would not be easy, but he trusted in the loyalty and skill of his men. On the other side, Absalom, confident in his numerical superiority, marched with determination, certain that victory was within his grasp. When the two armies met, the battle began with fierce intensity. The sound of swords clashing and war cries echoed through the forest as men fought bravely. The dense vegetation made movement difficult, making the fight even more chaotic and brutal. Despite Absalom's numerical advantage, David's forces, led by experienced commanders like Joab, fought with skill and courage. As the battle progressed, it became clear that David's strategy was working. The forest of Ephraim, with its narrow paths and uneven terrain, favored David's smaller and more agile forces. Absalom's army, despite its size, found it difficult to maneuver and coordinate their attacks. Absalom's numerical advantage began to dissipate in the face of the skill and experience of David's soldiers. In the midst of the battle's chaos, Absalom found himself in a vulnerable position. Mounted on his mule, he tried to escape through the dense thicket of trees, but his long hair, a symbol of his vanity and pride, got caught in the branches of an oak tree. The mule kept running, leaving Absalom suspended and helpless, hanging by his hair. He was trapped, unable to free himself, becoming an easy target in the middle of the forest. Joab, the commander of David's army, found Absalom in this desperate position. Although David had expressly ordered that Absalom be spared, Joab, driven by the need to end the rebellion once and for all, disobeyed the king's orders. He saw that leaving Absalom alive could mean future conflicts and more bloodshed. With cold determination, Joab and his men killed Absalom right there, decisively ending the revolt. Absalom's death was a devastating blow to everyone. Absalom's soldiers, upon hearing of their leader's death, lost the will to fight and quickly dispersed. The news of Absalom's death reached David in a brutal manner. Although the rebellion was finally over, the emotional cost to David was immeasurable. He deeply mourned the loss of his son, crying out in pain and sorrow, "My son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died in your place." The battle in the forest of Ephraim was not just a military confrontation, but a tragic chapter in the life of David's family. Absalom's death marked the end of a painful rebellion, but left deep scars in David's heart and in the kingdom of Israel itself. The consequences of this battle would be felt for a long time, reminding everyone of the price of unbridled ambition and family conflict. With the rebellion quelled and the kingdom back under his control, David now faced the challenge of healing the wounds left by the war and rebuilding the unity of Israel. The story of the battle in the forest of Ephraim and Absalom's death would continue to resonate as a powerful reminder of the complexities and tragedies of leadership and family relationships. All this happened to fulfill the word of God, spoken through the prophet Nathan in the days when David sinned with Bathsheba. As David aged, concerns about the succession to the throne of Israel became increasingly urgent. David, now elderly and weakened, struggled with the illnesses and fatigue from years of reigning. In this context, Adonijah, one of David's sons, saw an opportunity to claim the throne for himself. Ambitious and determined, Adonijah believed he was the rightful heir to the throne, especially after the deaths of his older brothers, Amnon and Absalom. Taking advantage of his father's weakness, Adonijah began to surround himself with powerful allies. He secured the support of Joab, the commander of the army, and the priest Abiathar, influential figures in the kingdom. With this backing, Adonijah felt confident enough to proclaim himself king without David's authorization. He organized an elaborate coronation ceremony, inviting his supporters and celebrating as if he had already secured the throne of Israel. However, not everyone agreed with Adonijah's actions. Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, and the prophet Nathan were alarmed by Adonijah's audacity and his attempt to usurp the throne without the king's consent. They knew that David had promised Solomon, Bathsheba's son, as his successor. With the kingdom at stake, they decided to act swiftly to protect David's promise and ensure Solomon's ascension. Bathsheba went to David and, with Nathan's support, reminded him of his promise and the importance of fulfilling the divine will. David, still loving Solomon and recognizing the wisdom and justice of his young son, decided to act according to his promise. He ordered that Solomon be anointed king immediately, in a ceremony that would gather the support of all the leaders loyal to him. Zadok the priest and Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, along with the prophet Nathan, took Solomon to the Gihon spring, where he was anointed with sacred oil. The sound of trumpets and the shouts of "Long live King Solomon" echoed throughout Jerusalem, signaling to everyone that Solomon was David's chosen successor to the throne. The people, recognizing Solomon's legitimacy, quickly accepted his ascension. Adonijah, upon hearing the sounds of the celebrations, realized that his plan had failed. He feared for his life and ran to seek refuge at the altar, a sacred place where he hoped to find mercy. Solomon, now officially king, initially showed clemency, allowing Adonijah to live on the condition that he behaved loyally. However, Adonijah's ambition was not easily extinguished. He attempted to consolidate his power again by asking for the hand of Abishag, David's concubine, in marriage. This action was seen as an attempt to claim the throne again, as in the culture of the time. Taking the king's concubine meant claiming his power. Solomon, perceiving the continued threat posed by Adonijah, had no choice but to act decisively. Solomon ordered Adonijah's execution, putting an end to his ambitions and ensuring the stability of his own reign. Adonijah's death marked the end of the disputes for David's throne, allowing Solomon to govern Israel with wisdom and justice. Under Solomon's reign, Israel entered an era of peace and prosperity. However, Solomon also sinned against God, but that is a story we will tell in another video. Would you like me to make a complete video telling the story of King Solomon? Write to me in the comments. And so the saga of David's children ends with a mix of tragedy and resolutions. The stories of Tamar, Amnon, Absalom, and Adonijah are a powerful reminder that sin always has consequences. These biblical narratives teach us about the importance of justice, forgiveness, and the relentless pursuit of peace and wisdom. More importantly, God's word does not fail. I repeat, all this happened to fulfill the word of God, spoken through the prophet Nathan in the days when David sinned with Bathsheba. Indeed, the sword never departed. Write in the comments what you learned today. May God have mercy on you and bless you. I'll see you in the next video.